The ocean doesn't keep secrets. It swallows them whole. For centuries, my family's village, carved into the granite coast of Maine, lived by that creed. A place of jagged rocks, perpetual fog, and a silence so deep it felt louder than the crashing waves. I'm Sarah Vance, a marine biologist. Or at least, that's who I was before I came home. I left this place years ago, ran from the cold, damp air, and the even colder stares of its people. I traded the crushing isolation for the open expanse of scientific discovery. But the ocean, it has a long memory. It started with a call. Reports of a mass die-off. Bizarre? Unprecedented? Deep-sea creatures, things that should never see the light of day, were washing up on shore, their bodies contorted. For the scientific community, it was a puzzle. For me, it was a summons. I had to go back. Back to the weathered docks, slick with brine. Back to the narrow streets where every shadow held a story. Back to the one man I'd spent my life trying to forget, my grandfather. The moment I arrived, the hostility was a physical force, thick as the sea mist. The villagers moved with a strange, unnerving uniformity. Their faces weathered masks of suspicion. They'd watch me from behind drawn curtains, their whispers following me like the wind, distorted and eerie. When I tried to ask questions, to collect samples from the shore, I was met with a wall of silence. They'd block my path, their eyes holding a shared, dark knowledge. Leading them all was my grandfather, the village elder. A man as unyielding as the coastline itself. When I showed him my data, the undeniable proof of an ecological catastrophe, he just stared out at the gray, churning water and said, "It's just the tide, Sarah. The sea gives, and the sea takes." But this wasn't the tide. This was something else. The village was too prosperous for such a remote, harsh place. Their nets were always full, even when neighboring towns struggled. It didn't make sense. Their wealth was as unnatural as the deaths I was investigating. The deeper I dug, the more I felt like I was peeling back layers of a wound that had been festering for generations. The village library, a dusty, neglected building, held the first clue. Tucked away in an old town charter, I found a passage, written in archaic script, that spoke of a pact, a covenant, an offering to the abundance below in exchange for the sea's bounty. The truth, when it finally surfaced, was more horrifying than any scientific anomaly. The villagers, my family, had a god. An ancient, monstrous entity that dwelled in the crushing darkness beneath the waves. And this god was hungry. They fed it. Each generation, they traded a single human life to ensure the nets stayed full, to keep their isolated prosperity intact. The mass die-off wasn't a random event. It was a sign. The entity's feeding cycle was ending. The pact was due for renewal. And as I pieced it all together, I saw the looks in their eyes change from suspicion to resolve. They had chosen their next sacrifice. I was a Vance, an outsider, yet one of them. The perfect offering to appease their deep-sea deity. My scientific mind, trained to observe and analyze, was now my only weapon against a century of horrifying tradition. I had to think, not like a biologist, but like a survivor. The village's entire lifeblood was its fishing operation, a fleet of boats equipped with advanced sonar, all tethered to the docks. The ceremony, I learned from a terrified young fisherman who lost his brother to the tide years ago, was set for the next high tide. They would take me to the main pier, a long wooden finger pointing into the creature's domain, and offer me to the waves. I used my knowledge of the local currents, the very forces my grandfather claimed were responsible, to plan my escape. In my lab equipment, I had a specialized sonar disruptor, a device designed for marine research, capable of emitting a high-frequency pulse that could deafen anything sensitive to sound underwater. It was my only chance. The night of the ceremony was colder than I thought possible. The fog was so thick, it swallowed sound, muffling everything but the rhythmic, terrifying chanting of the villagers as they dragged me toward the pier. The air was electric with a primal fear. High tide was approaching, the water black and churning. My grandfather stood at the end of the pier, his face a granite mask, as they began to bind my hands. Then, from the depths, it rose. I only saw a part of it, a massive, scaled form that blotted out the horizon, a shape that defied all biological logic. A low resonant hum vibrated through the wood of the pier. This was it. With a final surge of adrenaline, I broke free just enough to activate the disruptor and hurl it into the water. The effect was instantaneous. A silent scream. A high-frequency pulse that hit the water with immense force. The creature recoiled, stunned, and disoriented. At the same time, the navigation screens on every boat in the fleet flickered and died. Chaos erupted. The villagers, their ritual shattered, scrambled in confusion. In that single moment of pandemonium, I ran. I jumped into a small rescue skiff I'd prepared, cut the lines, and gunned the engine, speeding away from the pier and toward the relative safety of the mainland. I risked one last look back. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing a scene of pure Lovecraftian horror. The entity, blinded and enraged, was tearing the pier apart, splintering the wood and steel as if they were matchsticks. The symbol of the town's prosperity, the source of their dark pact, was being obliterated by the very god they worshipped. The village's forced abundance was over, drowned in a torrent of fury they had unleashed. As I raced across the cold Atlantic, the first lights of the mainland a distant promise, I knew I hadn't just escaped. I had severed the chain. The ocean would no longer keep their secret. It would reclaim what was always its own. My name is Sarah Vance, and I survived the tide.